I will talk about Beowulf. That is an old English poem that has over 3,000 lines. It is the longest poem in Old English. It was written about 1,000 years ago. The author was an anonymous poet. The poem is about a Scandinavian hero Beowulf from Gitz in Sweden. He traveled to Denmark to help King Hrothgar with a monster known as Grendel. He kills the monster, but next day Grendel's mother comes to avenge Grendel and kills one of the king's men. Beowulf tracks her down and kills her. Then he returns to the castle where he received great honors and gifts. Then he returns home to Sweden and became king of Geats. After 15 years, Beowulf must face the dragon that threatens his land. He defeats the dragon but gets mortally wounded and dies. His funeral ends the poem. In Middle Ages, the society believed in a concept of revenge that resulted in a revenge cycle. If someone killed one of your men, you were obligated to avenge his death. But then that group was obligated to avenge that death, and so on and so on. There is evidence about that in Beowulf's killing of Grendel and then Grendel's mother seeking retribution. The cycle only ends because there is no one left to carry out the revenge. They also believe in the concept of fate. There are numerous references to fate in the poem, so while the characters take actions to defeat their enemies, they are also aware that fate has a hand in the situation. One of the most important things that shows how Beowulf is representative of the Middle Ages is the poem is mainly about kings and knights, and this is the common thing of the poem and Middle Ages. Back in Middle Ages time, it was common that people wanted a king that was chivalrous, powerful, and daring. This was the early feudal society. The people would, in turn, promise the loyalty to the king by becoming his knights and defenders. On that time, the people of a town have a complete system of defense, all based on the honor and loyalty that they feel for a king. So, the poem Beowulf includes all the Middle Ages elements that uncover the society as it was.
Geoffrey Chaucer was a famous writer in the Middle Age. Geoffrey Chaucer was born in London year 1340. Chaucer was famous for his writing. He was called the father of poetry. In 1357, he became a public servant to Countess Elizabeth of Ulster, and he continued that capacity with the British court throughout his lifetime. The Canterbury Tales became his best known and most famous work. Chaucer died October 27 in the year 1400 in London. He was the first to be buried in Westminster Abbey's Poet Corner.
Robin Hood is a traditional literature figure according to tradition, a legendary outlaw brigand in the 1200th century England, first mentioned in 1377 in William Langland's works Piers Plowman. Originally before the end of the 1800s, his work was more of a protest against the local authority and to take back the tax money and give back to the people. Robin Hood became in modern times instead known for living the motto of taking from the rich and give to the poor, which are neither consistent with the legend or with most modern representations in film and literature. Robin Hood's adventures were later told by including Howard Pyle, example, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, 1883, and many believe that it probably goes back to a general term for brigands in the High Middle Ages in England, where they were called Robin Hood. The stories of Robin Hood has developed through the centuries and changed to suit the taste of the future. From the 1400s is evidence that the spectacle of Robin Hood was made in connection with Madfesta. These performances were made by young amateur actors who wandered from town to town. Around the year 1500, has performances of the stories of Robin Hood are given place at spring festivals and processions. It is only in these spectacles Lady Marion makes her entrance in the English legend. She is believed to have been imported from France, where the poet Adam de la Helle at the end of the 1200s talked about a romance between Shepherdess Marion and Robin Shepherd. Originally, Robin Hood is mentioned as a yeoman, a free pawn between the poorer peasants and nobility. Whether a Robin Hood really existed in the real world is a moot point. A common version was that he was a yeoman named Robert Locksley who became an outlaw after poaching. Most of today's historians believe that Robin Hood is a literature figure from the Middle English who may have several real role models. Black Death outbreak is behind another social phenomena, a theory that can explain the Robin Hood legend. When many died of the plague, it was a shortage of labor, which had previously been cheap and accessible. That made it possible for the feudal elite to live well on the peasants and their serfs work for low wages. Now it was suddenly short of workers, and the poor labor became more in demand, which meant that they could choose to whom they wanted to work for, causing wages and prices of agricultural products in the UK to rise. This did not tolerate the nobility and the king, who forbade the rise of prices on labor and agricultural products. This would obviously not please the peasants, and many organized themselves into guerrilla-like movements under various leaders, including Wat Tyler, who came to conduct guerrilla warfare against the monarchy, and that may have been the reality model of the Robin Hood legend.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail are representative of literature in the medieval age, partly because many of the animated scenes and introductions were inspired by drawings that had been found in books written by monks of that era, but most importantly because it is inspired by the tales of King Arthur and his knights. There are references to these legends of King Arthur throughout the film. For instance, when King Arthur comes across the Black Knight and asks whether he will wish to join him, he says, "You have proven yourself worthy. Come join me at the court of Camelot." Many of the knights who accompanied King Arthur are also mentioned: Sir Galahad, Lancelot, and Sir Bedivere, to name a few. The drawings which I mentioned earlier inspired the animated introductions and cutscenes, and was found in the margins of the books that monks in monasteries wrote. The function of these drawings was to mock the church or king, illustrate and exemplify the text that it was written with, or something as mundane as making the tedious job of writing the books more amusing. Furthermore, the fact it was forbidden to hurt or kill a man of religion with intention enabled the monks to draw these doodles almost entirely without having to concern themselves with the consequences. An example of one of these scenes is the one with the killer rabbit. They got the idea for this when they found a picture of a giant rabbit killing a man with a sword. Or when they entered the cave which the rabbit was guarding, they encounter a dragon whom they are chased by. After a while, though, the chase comes to an abrupt end when, in a typical Monty Python sense of humor, the animator who was drawing the dragon dies and the threat disappears. The armor that King Arthur and his soldiers wore was contemporary at the time, although not the type of armor that you would expect to find in 932 AD, which is the year that the movie is set in. Instead, you might find this kind of armor around the 13th century.